So good evening. Welcome to the February Beaches Watch community meeting. I'm Maria Mark, president of Beaches Watch and your host for tonight's meeting. Before we get started with the meeting, I would like to make a few announcements here. You can see that on the screen. As always, we video our meetings. So if your friends and neighbors aren't able to see the meeting or you want to watch it again, it will be on our YouTube channel, Beaches Watch 2012. So you can be able to watch it then at your convenience. It's 2021, so it's time to renew or join your membership or join the membership for Beaches Watch. It's $15 for individual, $20 for family, and $5 for student. The memberships are annual from January through December, and you can renew your membership or make a donation online at our website, beacheswatch.com. Your membership really helps support our organization by bringing these community meetings to you, by helping with our Give Back Award, as well as our Flan Sharp Memorial Scholarship to our Fletcher High School senior. So your membership and your donations really helps us continue our mission of making sure we are enhancing the quality of life here at the beaches. Some city council meeting date changes due to the President's Day holiday. Jacksonville Beach City Council will now meet on Tuesday, February 16 at 6 p.m. And the Neptune Beach City Council will meet Tuesday, February 16 at 6 p.m. Neptune Beach workshop dates. This is the continuation of their vision planning. They have some new dates. See on the screen, and our agenda again is will also be on our website, but they will be hosting them on February 18, how to get predictable development outcomes. February 22nd, City Council and the Community Development Board Code Framework Workshop will be held. February 23, Community Resilience Planning Workshop number 2. March 2nd, Site Design Standards and Building Height, and March 4, Architectural Guidelines. Okay, so our beaches COVID vaccine site. We are trying to get our state representatives to establish a COVID-19 vaccine site here at the beaches. So we encourage all of you to please call our representatives, Senator Aaron Bean at bean.aaron.web@flsenate.gov, and our representative Cord Bird at cord.bird@myfloridahouse.gov. And again, their email addresses will be, you can find them on our website. But our mayors have been working diligently in trying to get a vaccine site here at the beaches for our beaches community. So your voice is very important in supporting this initiative. The Atlantic Beach Tree Protection Code Review. We are continuing to review its tree protection code and welcomes community input. So please email your feedback and input to info@coab.us or visit the website www.coab.us/projects to get informed and involved. Atlantic Beach has vacancies on several of its boards. So this is a great way for you as citizens to get involved in what's going on in the city. The Cultural Arts and Recreation Advisory Committee has openings, the Pension Board, and the Board Member Review Committee. So to apply or get more information, please contact the City Clerk's office. Beaches Go Green. They're having a beach cleanup. This will be held on February 20th at 9 a.m. Meet at the Atlantic Boulevard Access. And prior to the cleanup, there will be a pre-cleanup yoga. So you will be able to get limber and flexible in order to help pick up trash. And that starts at 8 a.m. at the Beaches Town Center. Also, important, coming up in March, Wednesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. That's going to be our COVID and our schools. Where are we? What's next? We'll have our guest panel of our school board representative, Elizabeth Anderson, some of our beaches principals, a teacher representative, as well as a student. We are anticipating high attendance for this meeting, as this is an extremely important subject that a lot of our parents and have voiced that they would like to know more information. So we encourage you to go ahead and submit any questions you may have. We will be sending out an email where you can submit your questions prior to this particular meeting, so we can make sure that we address everyone's concerns. But again, mark your calendar, March 3rd at 7 p.m. It's going to be about COVID and our schools. Where are we and what's next? And now to introduce our speaker, Scott Dudley from the Florida League of Cities. He is the Director of Field Advocacy. His subject is going to be about home rule and the 2021 legislative session priorities. And before we get started, just a little bit about Scott. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Scott when I was a commissioner at Atlantic Beach, and was pretty heavily involved with the Florida League of Cities and worked closely with Scott and his staff and the staff at the Florida League of Cities, and the amazing work that they do in supporting home rule and a lot of other initiatives for our municipalities and our cities. So Scott serves as Director of Field Advocacy and Federal Affairs at the Florida League of Cities, where he has worked for almost 19 years. He oversees the grassroots and member advocacy efforts at the state and federal level for Florida's 411 municipalities. Prior to his current role as Grassroots Outreach Coordinator, he served as Legislative Director at the League of Cities for 6 years. Scott is an avowed political junkie and has been involved in the political process as a lobbyist, campaign manager, fundraiser, grassroots organizer, and in some other capacity for over 34 years. Scott has represented both public and private sector clients and has lobbied at the federal level in Washington, D.C., in the legislative and executive branches of government in numerous states around the country and at the local level. For 8 years prior to working at the Florida League of Cities, Scott worked for the silver imaging industry and was responsible for building grassroots organizations in 18 states to effectuate change in the laws and regulations impacting photo processors. Scott is a proud father of 3 sons, which I had no idea they were this age, 38, 36, and 34. He has 2 grandchildren, a beautiful 12-and-a-half-year-old granddaughter, and a very active 8-year-old grandson. Scott has traveled extensively and is an avid bicyclist, kayaker, outdoorsman, and sports enthusiast. He is also a proud graduate of Florida State University. Go Noles. Okay, happy to introduce Scott Dudley. Scott, take it away.
Great, thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Many of you, I've talked to this group a couple of times, and I was saying it's unfortunate I can't make it over there tonight because usually I fit in a little fun when I'm there and I get to see the beaches and hang out a little bit. So sorry, my loss on this one for sure. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about home rule and the League of Cities, and then give you a brief little legislative update to kind of put in perspective when I talk about home rule, sort of what's happening to home rule here in the Florida legislature, in that there's very little respect for home rule by the current legislature. So just a little bit of background real fast. Municipalities in Florida, they predate statehood. So you'll hear some legislators talk about, oh, if it weren't for the legislature, cities wouldn't exist. And by that logic, you could say that if it weren't for US Congress, states wouldn't exist, because the states have to go through the same process that cities do, and that the US Congress has to approve before a state joins the United States of America. Congress has to approve it. Well, so too does the legislature have to approve a city that is formed and created. The legislature, before it becomes officially a city, the legislature has to approve that. So the legislature likes to wave that around and saying, see, we have the power over you. But you need to remember, as I said, that municipalities, they predate statehood. municipalities are created. They're the only form of local government that is voluntary. They're created by a group of citizens that decide that they're not getting a certain level of services, or that they want to have more control over growth, or fill in the blank. For whatever reason, a city is created. They have to go through a process. A certain number of people that live in the area come together. They vote on the creation of the city. Then it goes to the legislature for approval. But it's really important to remember that unlike other local governmental entities, for instance, counties are simply extensions of the state. Everyone lives in a county. You don't have a choice whether you live in a county or not. You do have a choice whether you live in a city or not. You can choose to live in the unincorporated areas of the area that you're in, of the county that you're in, and you're in the county, but you're not necessarily in the city. So it's citizen driven rather than state driven living in a city. The whole concept of cities, that's where it came from. Given that citizen driven role of municipalities, the law in Florida, originally it's called Dillon's Rule. It severely restricted the ability of cities to exercise any of their powers. They had to go to the legislature if they wanted to change the stop sign, where a stop sign was in their city. If they wanted to change the amount that they're paying their police officers. Basically, every decision had to be made at the legislative level. So they were at that point under Dillon's Rule when cities were first created in like the 1840s up through basically almost through 1968. 1968 is the magic time where the legislature or the citizens of the state adopted Florida's Home Rule Amendment. It was in 1968 that Florida was granted, cities were granted their home rule powers. And what home rule powers said is that cities shall have governmental, corporate, and proprietary powers to enable them to conduct municipal government, perform municipal functions, and render municipal services, and exercise any other power for municipal purposes except as provided by law. And I'm going to talk about that provision, except for as provided by law. What that ultimately did, well, let me get a little bit further down the road before I talk to you about that. So as I said, in 1968, Florida changed its constitution to provide home rule powers. Home rule is simply the right of local self-government, the local citizens to determine what they want their city to look and feel like, to outlaw strip clubs or to keep bars open late, or to, you name it, to make those decisions that make your community uniquely your community. And that is what really home rule is all about. The home rule provision, as it was originally adopted in 1968, and for a lot of years after that, we're seeing a change in the last 10 to 15 years. But prior to that, the home rule provision placed enormous trust in the legislature to safeguard the right of local governments, of municipalities to make decisions, and the citizens to have some say in what was going on by making appropriate policy decisions. And they limited the exercise of their authority to overrule that local decision making. Florida citizens, when they adopted it, there were polls done. Florida citizens basically believed that the legislature would use their power to preempt local governments in a very limited fashion. That the legislature would not misuse that authority to advance special interests, protect the politically powerful, second guess local decisions, or promote personal agendas. Well, all those things are now the norm. The legislature is sticking its nose in local government's business on a regular basis and claiming that that is their just authority to do that. It's very unfortunate because really what it does is it strips local government and, more importantly, the citizens within municipalities. It strips them of the decision making powers that they were granted in the Constitution. They do have the authority to preempt. I don't want to mislead you in any way. Even the constitutional provision that granted home rule powers said that the legislature could preempt us. But again, I repeat to you that it was assumed that the legislature would use that power sparingly and only in instances, for instance, water quality. Water doesn't necessarily know municipal boundaries. So setting a statewide water quality standard. The idea that a stop sign is a stop sign and that ought to be fairly applied across the state. That, penalties for robbery and for, those things in terms of that certain crimes or where that shouldn't matter where it's committed. So that's really what was intended, to have the legislature have that authority to set some minimum standards and to basically some thresholds. And for instance, even with water quality, if a city wanted to go beyond what the state sets, that we ought to be able to do that. Water quality is a perfect example. Some cities have adopted fertilizer ordinances. It makes really good sense in that under the Federal Clean Water Act, the local government is responsible for, the municipality is responsible for the waters within its boundaries. So instead of spending millions and millions of dollars to clean up the waterways, some cities have adopted fertilizer ordinances or other water quality initiatives that make more sense in terms of preventing the pollution at the front end than it would be to clean it up at the back end. So that's part of home rule powers in terms of seeing that. The legislature seems now that they're in the mode of preempt first and ask questions later. They literally feel that if something is happening in another state where they don't like the outcome of what happened in another state, we see this all the time, that they say, well, we need to preempt our local governments, our cities, from ever undertaking anything like this because we don't want to have to deal with it. So a city may not have even tried to do something in the state of Florida, and the legislature, because of some special interest, they don't like the outcome of what happened in another state. There's shopping carts. We are preempted in terms of regulating shopping carts. We've been preempted in terms of regulating plastic bags. We've been preempted in terms of any type of local. They kind of peeled some of it back, but in terms of gun laws, straws, guns, exactly. I just see Martha sent me something saying straws, guns. So all those issues, the legislature keeps sticking their nose in local decision making and taking that power away from you as the citizens to have a say in what's happening. You saw a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, they passed legislation. Cities were adopting ordinances related to beach access. Well, somebody didn't like what was happening, and that apparently the poor unwashed were using the back beaches. They were using the beaches of some rich people, and they decided so they were going to preempt us. Tree trimming is another area where the legislature put its stamp on local government regulations relating to tree trimming. Siting of cell towers. The legislature preempted local government authority on that. They've said that we have to basically cite them, and they've made a really strict timeline for citing those. And if we don't have, if we can't respond to the requests, the applications in what they consider a timely fashion, they're considered to be automatically approved. So it's just not been a very good thing in the last few years. Zoning is a particular area where the legislature has, in many ways, zoning is one of the primary tenets of local government control. Well, in the last few years, the legislature has even stuck its nose in that. For instance, with vacation rentals, it's a really big issue around the state. In terms of the legislature has tied the hands of local government in terms of regulating vacation rentals in your neighborhoods. They've done the same thing on some other land use issues. They recently adopted legislation that limited your ability to deal with sign ordinances that have dealt with, I told you about some water quality related issues, beach access issues. So a whole host of issues that really should be being made at the local level, and the legislature is sticking its nose in local government decision making and limiting the the ability of you as citizens to have a say in what your city looks like, feels like, and the way it operates. It's really become an epidemic of sorts. And I would tell you that there are organizations out there that are drafting and providing to legislators preemption language. I've been to a conference where basically they sat around the table and talked about, okay, what should we be focused on this year in terms of preempting local governments? I was like, well, none. You shouldn't be focused on any of that. There were more of the other side than there were of me there. And so there was some model preemption language that was introduced. I can tell you that this session, you're going to see a number of bills that deal with preempting local governments. One of those deals with, again, vacation rentals is a pretty big issue. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the legislation that we should be on the lookout for. Another one deals with home-based businesses, not basically just the attorney sitting there at his office or her office or the accountant, but no, actually they want to allow any type of home-based business to be allowed in a residential neighborhood. They see what's happened during the pandemic, and they're basically legislating by anecdote, which they're prone to do. And they say, all right, well, if it's worked during the pandemic where more people are working from home, well, then we ought to allow every type of business that you can, anybody that wants to. So under the bill as it's currently drafted, it would allow, for instance, it would allow somebody to set up a auto repair shop in a residential neighborhood. It would allow somebody to set up a jet ski rental company in a residential neighborhood. So they basically are gutting one of the primary tenets of municipal home rule authority, which is zoning, making decisions about land use, what should be allowed in your city and what shouldn't be allowed in your city. It is really a bad thing. So that's a real quick primer of home rule. Let me talk real briefly about the other evil that we fight a lot here, which is unfunded mandates. And that's where the legislature says, you know, we have a really great idea about what some benefit that we should provide. And we like it so much that we're going to make the local governments pay for it. We're going to make the counties or the cities pay for it. We saw that with respect to benefits for police and firefighters. And we're not anti-police and firefighter. We know that cities can't be successful if you don't have, people wouldn't want to live there if you didn't have adequate police and firefighter services, first responders. But the idea that the legislature says, well, you ought to provide this particular benefit, and they don't give us any money in order to provide that benefit. So they get the sort of the credit, if you will, of that they're mandating this, but they're not given any of the resources. We're not given any of the resources to pay for the benefits that are bestowed by the legislature. That's the other thing that we fight a lot here in Tallahassee is the unfunded mandates. Let's see. Jump to talk about a couple of the key issues. Did anybody have, I don't know if you want me to open it now for questions in terms of what home rule. I want to make sure everybody fully understands that. If you want to ask any questions on that right now, I'm happy to answer that before I move on to some of the legislation that we're looking at this session. Is that how you want me to, Maria? Is that?
Scott, what we'll do is let you finish your presentation. I'm monitoring the chat box now, and we will go ahead and go through the Q&A after your presentation.
Excellent.
Okay,
great. So let me talk to you about a couple of bills that are being looked at this year. You heard me talk about home-based businesses, Senate Bill 266 and HB 403, preemption of regulation of home-based businesses. It basically says that any two people living in a house are allowed to work at, or anybody living in a house can open a business, and you can have up to two other employees come in. So you could literally open a car repair shop in your neighborhood, and you can hire up to 2 other people and the individuals living in the house, and that would be allowed under under those proposals. There's a bill, 2 bills dealing with vacation rentals. It would preempt local government authority on vacation rentals. That's House Bill 219 and Senate Bill 522. Again, that's House Bill 219 and Senate Bill 522. Preempts local government authority to regulate vacation rentals. We were fully preempted in 2011. They came back in 2014 and gave us a little bit of authority back and said, well, if you're going to adopt an ordinance, that it has to apply. If you had an ordinance in place in 2011, you can keep that, and any additional ordinances have to, basically have to apply the ordinance to any residential area. So you can't treat vacation rentals differently than you can any other residence. Well, obviously, the problem isn't with other residences; it's with having a mini motel in your neighborhood. Some of the other bills deal with preemption of building design. So there are cities that have a certain look. For instance, Coral Gables is one that pops right into my mind, that they have a certain look there. And they say, you have to meet these architectural standards in order to build a house here. Well, the legislature's saying, nope, we're not going to let you do that anymore, cities, that we're not going to allow you to regulate unless it's within a historical district. We're not going to allow you to regulate anything at all with respect to, other than that it has to meet the building code, but you can't have a particular look about your city. So any kind of setback for signs and things like that would go away. Property line, how far it could set back from property line, anything like that would all go away under this bill. Regulation of let's see. So there's another bill, and on its face, you think, okay, well, that doesn't sound like a terrible thing. House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 484, and it's dealing with combating public disorder. And it's basically, the governor touts it as fighting the rioting, looting, for citizens that are not peacefully protesting. But when you peel back the onion, it says, for instance, that if a citizen, any citizen, when you propose your budget, if it appears that you're cutting back any of your funding for public safety, police or firefighter, that a citizen can take you before the governor and cabinet and appeal that decision of the local government. And if it appears that you're cutting back on those budgets, that they can take you before what they call the administration commission, governor and cabinet, and make you fund the police and firefighter at the same level it was before. Well, what that ignores, you say, okay, well, maybe that's a good thing. But what if one year you buy 20 police cars, and then the next year you don't need 20 police cars? And so you, quote, cut your budget, even though you haven't really, you just don't need as many police cars that one year as you did, or the number of bullets. You buy, a bunch of bullets one year, and the next year you don't need as many. Or your pension costs go down because the market, your return on your investments were better. So you cut back on the number or the amount of money that you're investing in your pension for that year. Well, a citizen, not even on your final budget, but on your base budget that you're bringing out to have the citizens provide input, they can drag you before the governor and cabinet on your spending decisions that aren't even finalized, and make you basically explain what you're doing and why you're doing it to the governor and cabinet. And the governor and cabinet could say, well, you can't do that. We're not going to allow that. And they would basically force you to do that. They're using the model of what happens now with the sheriffs, is that there's a process in place where a county, if they cut the sheriff's budget, that there's a process in place to appeal that. But it's really, this is reckless in terms of the bureaucracy that's involved in going before the governor and cabinet. You may have one citizen do it, or you may have 20 citizens do it. And each one of those would require a hearing in front of the governor and cabinet. And there may be a very perfectly logical reason for you to be cutting your budget. Some of the there's a couple of good things that the legislature is doing. They're trying to give us some additional authority with respect to smoking in public areas. So they're trying to give local government some authority in that. There's a bill, House Bill 13, that deals with freezing or limiting the legislature's ability to sweep the housing trust fund. The housing trust fund is made up of documentary stamp tax dollars, and year after year for the last several years, the legislatures come in and use that money. They've swept the trust funds and used those dollars for things that have nothing to do with housing. And so this bill would actually say that they can't use it for anything other than for housing purposes. So there's a couple of good things out there, but overall, right now we're seeing a lot of legislation that would further preempt local governments. One of the things I want to just generally talk about is how important you all are to the process. You've heard the saying about all politics is local. It's really true. That if I go as a lobbyist for the Florida League of Cities and I talk to one of your legislators and I have a discussion with them about an issue, it doesn't mean the same thing as if one of you picks up the phone or writes a letter or sends an email and says, hey, you know what? I'm really concerned about this vacation rental, the way you guys are handling this. And I saw somebody posted that they're in favor of vacation rentals. Well, so are we. So is the League of Cities. If that's what your city wants, if that's what the citizens of your city say, and if there's a process in place, but what the legislation would do is allow you to have no authority over vacation rentals at all. So you could basically anywhere in your city, you could somebody could put up a vacation rental. So for those that are in favor of it, the league's not necessarily opposed to vacation rentals per se. We're opposed to the legislature taking that authority away from local governments and letting local governments make that decision. So I just wanted to point that out. So some of the other issues deal with, and here's again another one that sounds like a pretty good idea of there's legislation that would basically restrict, after a short amount of time, basically 5 years, restrict any discharges from wastewater treatment plants into surface waters. Well, that's a laudable goal. It's a great goal. The price tag on that is billions of dollars. And so what we need to figure out is how do we get there in terms of allowing of prohibiting discharges to surface waters within a budget. That's one of those unfunded mandates that I talk about, because they're not giving us the money, the local governments, the money to get there. They're just saying that within 5 years, we'd have to stop all discharges to surface waters. And yeah, we want to save the environment. We want the water to be clean. We're trying to do a lot of things. Your local governments are doing that. And I'm talking to the beach group, and I particularly am sensitive to the idea that that's where your mind might be. But in terms of not providing the dollars and having it be done in such a short amount of time is problematic. There's a right way to do it. So giving us a proper glide path, maybe 10 years, whatever amount of time, and also providing some funding to help us get there in terms of cutting back on septic tanks and hooking up to sewer, and then also giving us the dollars to help us enhance the treatment level that we're giving that we're providing for that water before us discharge. So those are a couple of the bills that are out there. I want to talk to you about that. The league, one of our goals this year is to I'm now in charge of our grassroots program, and one of the things that we are trying to get folks to do is get more involved, to get average citizens more involved. And one of the ways that you can do that is we have we've basically we're introducing technology into our lobbying efforts, a higher level of technology. And I want you to write down this, if you could. If you text the word home rule, it can be one word or two, it doesn't matter. Home rule, that's HOMERULE, home rule. And if you text that to this following number, 50457, that's 50457. What that will do, it will get you on our legislative alert list. And it will, first of all, it will send you back a link that will ask you to fill out your information and agree that we can send you alerts, and you can unsubscribe at any time if you feel like we're sending too many. We try to be very judicious in it. And so text 50457, text home rule to 50457, and that will put you in our database for getting legislative alerts and being engaged. I started to talk about all politics being local. The other truism in politics is that not only is all politics local, but it's all about relationships. In real estate, they talk about location, location, location. Well, in politics, they talk about relationships, relationships, relationships. And what that means is that it's important for you to build relationship with the decision makers here in Tallahassee, with your state legislators, with your state senators, with your members of Congress. Let them know that you're paying attention to what they're doing up here in Tallahassee. You know, it's very difficult. I don't know how many of you watch the Florida channel when they're having committee meetings, but they basically will take up a topic that's super, super complicated and convoluted and lots of nuance to it. And they'll ask people to come up and they'll give them a minute to testify on an issue. And there's, 100 people that want to testify on it, and they give everybody 1 minute. Well, it's really hard to make a mark or make a meaningful argument in 1 minute that they allocate. And while you're talking, they're typically, looking at their watch or giving you the hurry up sign. And at 1 minute, they cut off your microphone. And so if you're trying to make a difference during the legislative session, that's not really the best time to start it. The best time to start it is ahead of time, where you're talking to your legislator, you let them know, hey, I'm paying attention to what you're doing in Tallahassee. And when you get back home, we're going to have a discussion. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk to you about what you did in Tallahassee. What did you do to help the citizens of your city or your county or the state of Florida, versus what did you do to help the special interests that are filing bills to do X, Y, and Z that may not be for the best interest of the state, but in the best interest of that special interest. And so we really encourage you to try to get engaged fully in that by building that relationship with your legislator. It's not too late. Session starts early March, I think March 2nd this year. And we want you to be fully engaged with your legislator and let them know you're paying attention. And with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions. I see that there's a lot of chats that come in, and I haven't really been able to read those as they come in just because I've been kind of talking. So I'm happy, Marie, to try to talk about, answer any questions that people might have.
Okay, thank you, Scott. That was actually perfect timing. Yeah, so I've been keeping track of the questions here. So in no particular order, and I was trying to field the ones that you have already addressed, but for the audience, if I miss your question, please send it back to me in the chat function. I will be also monitoring that. So first question, Scott, beside grassroots efforts and voting, what recourse do cities have to challenge and overturn an overzealous state legislature? Could a challenge rise to the level of the Supreme Court of the U.S.?
Well, probably not some have made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, but typically it's handled by the Florida Supreme Court. And certainly after every legislative session, there's always some city or the League of Cities we usually get involved at the appellate level instead of at the trial court level. And yes, there are groups that regularly sue the legislature for overstepping their boundaries. I can tell you, for instance, on the cell tower legislation, that there's a suit pending on that. That's working its way through the process. On the case dealing with the beach access, there's a case moving forward with that. If you remember when the legislature preempted us on guns, there was a case on that where they penalized local governments for adopting any type of gun-related legislation. That worked its way up to the Florida Supreme Court. So yes, there are absolutely suits that happen, and when they are meaningful in terms of that they have a severe impact on municipalities across the state, the League of Cities at the appellate level we sometimes decided to engage in those. So
excellent, thank you. So ideally, what role should the state government play in, I say, quote, assisting rather than dictating to the municipalities?
well, so that's a great question, and thank you for that. The question really is um, looking at state needs. The legislature meets for 60 days a year, and we're a growing state. We have last year we had a $96 billion budget, and figuring out ways we're in the middle of a pandemic. Should the legislature be spending its time on meddling in local government affairs in terms of how you use your local impact fees, how you zone for charter schools? Is that what they should be spending their time on? Or should they be spending their time on issues of statewide importance? I would suggest to you that it should be the issues of statewide importance. And heavens knows, we definitely have a lot of those statewide issues. We've got clean water issues. We've got funding issues. Look at our infrastructure. If you look in terms of the grading for our infrastructure, we got some problems in terms of finding money for roads and bridges and rail and all those things. That's what the legislature should be trying to come up with solutions for, not local zoning decisions, not things that you and I as citizens in our city. I like the fact that Tallahassee, that you can't cut down trees. I like that a lot. I think that there's an awful lot of cities who have worked really hard to get that designation as a tree city USA, and the legislature basically gutted that with their legislation dealing with preempting us on tree cutting. You go to an arborist, you pay $75 to an arborist for a letter that says, yeah, that tree poses a problem. Well, we're in Florida, we have hurricanes. Of course, any tree poses a problem. So what are we going to do? Cut them all down? I mean, so I would suggest that the answer there is that let your legislators, I talked about letting your legislator know that you're paying attention to what they're doing here in Tallahassee and what are they doing for the good of the state instead of for the special interest that they're doing the bidding for.
Right, right. So that kind of leads into the next question about like HOAs. How are they dealing with some of these, the regulations, like the architectural regulations, some of the zoning laws as well? And there's another question about, can the state overturn any and all local zoning laws? And our community development boards, they all are authoritative boards that, enact those.
So the answer, I'll take the second one first. Yes, they could. In fact, I believe that the home-based business bill would in fact overturn all the zoning. It would essentially render your zoning. You set your industrial area out in the industrial, in an industrial section of town. You don't allow it in your neighborhoods. This local the bill that allows for home-based business would in fact eviscerate that. It would allow any type of a business. You couldn't regulate a business differently than you could a residence, other than within the parameters that only 2 employees. But I mean, you think about a Minute Mart, you could have 2 employees, mom and pop, running it from upstairs, and somebody comes in the store, they run downstairs, and there you go. You've got a little mini mart or a gas station or a whatever in your neighborhood. And that bill would really undo. So yes, they could. They're already, if you look at the signage language that they did a couple of years ago, they killed signage ordinances for the most part in the state of Florida by saying that we couldn't regulate retail signage, that we were limited in how we could do that. And that was one person was having a fight, one sign company was having a fight with one city, and the legislature came in and by anecdote, because they wanted to help that one sign company out, they adopted a law that affected all 411 cities across the state of Florida instead of allowing it to be dealt with at the local level.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question about, if you live in an unincorporated area in a county, does the state have more control or where there isn't a city? Like,
So two things. I forgot about the HOA part, and
okay.
so
Oh,
let
yeah.
me get
Sorry.
back to that. The
Yes.
HOA
Yes.
part. I had forgot about answering it, but it's important because it's sort of, so one of the things that the legislature has been doing is they basically have been exempting HOAs from a lot of these preemptions, which if you live in an HOA, that's great. Because you're exempt from the preemption. So you get to, for instance, in certain HOAs under the cell tower law, they basically excluded the villages, Winter Park, the Keys, and a couple other areas that had good lobbyists and got themselves carved out. If you live in an HOA, a lot of these preemptions, they're saying, well, the preemptions don't apply to you. But that's not really a fair way to go about doing business, to give the HOA people in HOA to have more power. Why do they have more authority than you or I who may not live in an HOA? Why should an HOA have more authority? It ought to be evenly distributed in terms of if there's going to be pain. It ought to, if the legislature wants to take an action, if it's good for HOAs to be exempt from it, why isn't it good for everybody else to be exempt from it?
Mhm.
And so that's the answer on the HOA, is that they've been carving that out because they recognize the hornet's nest it is by including HOAs, and that it somehow it breaches some contracts. But it's really two standards, and it's grossly unfair. The
Mhm.
question about more authority in counties. So counties have a different type of home rule. Counties really are extensions of the state in terms of that they have Department of Health that basically deals with all the health related issues. They have constitutional officers, the sheriffs. They have, so a lot more of their roles are state. They're enacting the state, what the state is supposed to do. It's just sort of an extension of the state. And so the rules are a little bit different in counties. Counties do have some home rule authority, and it depends on what type of county you live in. For instance, Duval is a charter county, so the cities have less authority within the cities than the count. The county has more authority over the cities than in other counties across the state. There's only 19 charter counties across the state, and the rules are different in those counties.
Right. Right. Um, so let's see. His question's about, can you talk a little bit more about the bills regarding smoking in public places?
Yes. So the bill would actually give local cities and counties the authority to regulate smoking in parks and at beaches and a limited number of areas, but at least it does give us some authority back that they've taken away. We've partnered with the American Heart Association, the American Lung Association. There's a bunch of groups that want that. Honestly, it also deals with, and you all know this as beach watch folks, I'm sure you've cleaned up when you're doing beach. I heard you talking about a beach cleanup. Probably one of the biggest things you find on the beach is a lot of cigarette butts. And so that's becoming an issue, and they clog up wastewater treatment plants. And there's a whole bunch of economic impact. Who wants to go to a beach that has a bunch of cigarette butts on it? So I think the legislature is waking up to that a little bit. And so they're recognizing that it ought to, if we banned it in state buildings and all that, that it ought to be appropriate to be able to ban it in a public park where you're not sitting next to somebody that's smoking.
And I know you had mentioned briefly at the beginning about plastic bags and straws and that sort of thing. Could you kind of repeat what's going on with that or where that sits?
So 2 years ago, sorry, was it last year? All the years run together. I think it was 2 years ago. The
Yeah.
governor vetoed a bill that included a ban on they preempted local government authority over plastic
Right.
straws.
Right.
The governor vetoed that, saying if you don't like the idea that you're preempting plastic straws, run for your city council and vote to not preempt them, or to not ban them. So we thought we were going to have a great, strong advocate for home rule authority at that. Well, that has not turned out to be the case thus far. He certainly has been helpful on some issues, so I don't want to take any of that away from him. But there's a lot of preemptions that have passed. With respect to plastic bags, there's a really weird provision in statute that said that DEP was supposed to do a study on plastic bags, and that we were preempted until DEP finished their study and released it, and the legislature took action. Well, DEP did their study, but the legislature's never taken action on the report. And so we're in no man's land, because we can't do anything until the legislature takes some action, acknowledges the report, so they've never acted on it. So they preempted us only in the short run, supposedly, but it's been about 7-8 years now since we've been preempted on plastic bags, that we can't take any action on that.
Mm-hmm. So, if you're listening to this, it seems a bit overwhelming, right? There's so much going on. And you've always heard, kind of pick your battles, right? And so for Beaches Watch, from our perspective as our organization, because what we do, as you know, is we try to inform citizens on these important issues. How would you, or what would you suggest that we could do to, do we kind of try and drill it down to maybe the top 3 issues that have the biggest impact, or could have the biggest impact on the quality of life here for our beaches communities, or, something that our residents can kind of wrap their heads around? I mean, there's so much out there, and then sort of focus in on that with our representatives. Would you think that would be a good strategy or a good tactic for us to start building that grassroots advocacy?
Yeah, man, I think so. Really, I think that the message is actually kind of easy if you really just kind of drill down and peel back all the complications about what the legislature, this policy or that policy. The really easy message is that the legislature ought to mind its own business. The legislature ought to deal with issues of statewide importance and stop meddling in decisions that should be made at the local level. That's a pretty straightforward message and an easy one to deliver. Remind the legislator that they're not up here to make decisions. If they want to run a city, tell them to run for city council.
Right.
If that's what their interest is. But other than that, I mean, it's really ridiculous, the idea that cities around the state and citizens around the state you talk about plastic bags is a great example. If you poll after poll after poll says we got to do something about plastic bags, well, we can't. We're not allowed to do that. So that's because the legislature meddled. And so the real basic message is that, hey, you ought to be really careful. You ought to use preemption really judiciously and really responsibly, and not every time somebody comes to you with a problem that you're first, it's literally gotten to the point of ready, fire, aim.
Right.
When it comes to preemptions, they preempt and then they go, oh, okay, well, maybe we didn't need to do it that much. And so really that's the short message, is tell them to stay in their lane. And their lane is deal with issues of statewide importance. And whether a local government wants to ban plastic bags or not is not a statewide issue.
Right. And so with our own local representatives, Representative Byrd and Senator Bean, I mean, is that just kind of the general message that we should be honing in with them as they are, picking their battles as well? And
yes, ma'am, that is, because it's just it's the easiest message. It's one that doesn't get lost in translation. It does. So the problem when you start to get into all the nuances of legislation, they say, well, I fixed this part of it, so I made it a little bit better. Well, you don't have to worry about that if you're just keeping in your lane, which is worry about issues of statewide importance. Pass a budget, deal with homeless issues, to the extent in terms of where it's a statewide, what the state can do, deal with transportation issues, build more roads, deal with the issues that are of statewide importance, and just keep your nose out of, if they want to run for city, county, or county commission, let them run for that, and stay out of the decision-making process.
right.
And so Beach Watch, so somebody, I think I see about not doing texts, the legislative alerts. Yes, we can, if you send me a list of some names, I can certainly put them on the list of our email, our email list that we send out, because you're right, not everybody does texts. So we're happy to help accommodate that. So if you send me a list of emails, I'm happy to provide that. And we'll send out our legislative weekly briefing on legislative issues, and you can stay up to date that way. And being informed really matters, and we're happy to help keep you informed.
And there's a way for citizens to sign up via your website too, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, there is. Exactly.
So we'll provide that, your website for that as well, and they can sign up and provide their email or however they want to receive their alerts.
Yep, FloridaLeagueOfCities.com.
Okay. And one more question, because you did bring up FDOT, and this is about FDOT has roads running through our cities. What's the best way to get them to check on dangerous intersections? Yeah, and then the rest.
So typically, the best way is the state is broken into, I can't remember, it's 5 or 7 transportation districts.
Mhm.
And your best bet is to always start with your local, the secretary of the region that you're in. Trying to kick that gets lost in the bureaucracy when it comes up here to Tallahassee. But at your local level, deal with your local DOT district, your regional district. And then if you don't get satisfaction, you talk to your legislator and you talk to your MPO. You can deal with that. There's a group called the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So I would start at the regional DOT area and the MPO, and then sort of kick it on up the ladder.
Yeah, we have the North Florida Transportation, the TPO.
Yes.
Which is the same as,
yes, ma'am.
I think. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that those are all the questions. And our mayor from Atlantic Beach says our beaches cities are grateful to Florida League of Cities and to you for all that you guys do for us. So we really appreciate all the information that you've given to us, Scott, and the ways that we can get involved and keep our citizens involved. Because it is about our voice, and it is about us, letting our representatives know what we feel like is best for us. And as you stated earlier, it's really those unfunded mandates just put a stranglehold on us, and something we've been dealing with. So
right.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry you weren't able to come over here, do some surfing, but I don't think the waves are that great anyway. So
good. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
So I had there's a question, is it 2012 or 2021? And I'm confused about the question that just popped up.
I'm not watched the recorded meeting. Oh, yeah. Well, I think our YouTube is still showing 2012 because that's when it was probably established.
Oh, okay. Okay.
On the YouTube to watch the meeting. So that's okay. What that was.
All right, cool. And again, I encourage everybody to text 50457 if you want to be part of our grassroots movement to try to stop the legislature from infringing on citizen decision-making.
All right. Well, Scott, it's always great to hear from you.
Anytime. I'd love to make it an annual thing. I'd love to anytime.
Yes, absolutely. So take care, stay safe, and say hi to everyone at the Florida League of Cities for us. And
thank you. I will.
And you for all that you guys do for us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what you all are doing too. Thank you.
All right, Scott. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
So that concludes our meeting. Again, it has been recorded. You can watch it on our YouTube channel, Beaches Watch 2012. Follow us on Facebook, visit our website. And please, if you don't mind taking like 1 minute to fill out our short survey, it lets us know how we're doing and making sure that we're bringing relevant information to you. And we welcome any suggestions you may have for future meetings. So we're finishing on time and appreciate you participating, and we'll look forward to Zooming with you next month, March. It's talking about COVID, our schools. We're going to get the lowdown on what's going on. We'll have a great panel. So please make sure that's on your calendar. Until then, stay safe, and we will Zoom with you next month. Thank you.